Hey everybody, hope you're doing great today. This is Paul from This Way to the Aquarium. Today I want to talk about plants and bringing in pest snails from those plants. So I have in the past have bought plants from local fish auctions. I've bought plants online from eBay. You can get some pretty good deals on plants from your local fish auctions from eBay, and even some of the local pet stores that you're purchasing plants from. Sometimes they happen to have snails in those tanks. Now, some of those snails are fine. You got those neorite snails, which generally don't reproduce in your freshwater tanks, but if you got brackish water, that's a different story. So I intentionally will introduce neorite snails in my tanks just to help with algae cleanup and other debris cleanup in the tank. But on the other hand, you might get a batch of snails that just kind of go out of control. They start breeding like crazy. You only need one, or you've got some hidden eggs on those plants. Suddenly you got a dozen or more snails in there and you're like, what the heck happened over here? So some people like the snails, they don't mind it because it can keep your tanks pretty clean. Other people find them to be problematic, whether you don't like the look or they're harming your plants in some other way. There are different ways to avoid those pest snails. So in this video I'm going to look at one particular way, and that is called tissue culture. Basically you're buying tissue cultured plants that are grown in a lab, grown on what they call agar. It's a type of growing medium. They'll just take a small cutting, part of the plant, start growing it, grow it in large enough quantities, and then sell it to end users like myself, like yourself, who can then just put it in our tank. And the one benefit of tissue culture plants is there should be no snails and there should be no disease. So that's another thing that you can get when you transfer plants between tanks, or you're buying plants online. If there were any diseases in those tanks, if there are any harmful vectors in the tank, so meaning like harmful bacteria, harmful microorganisms, hydra, planaria, those can easily get transferred to your tank. So things like planaria, if you got a shrimp tank, you add the wrong plant in there, it's got planaria in there, it'll quickly wipe out your shrimp population, which is no fun. So I recently purchased this plant right here. This is a top fin buse plant, Bucephalandra. And so I purchased this from PetSmart. As you can see, top fin, I believe that's the PetSmart brand. So while it does cost a little more, and like I mentioned, you can get some great deals at your local fish auction. You can also get some great deals at eBay. There's a lot of sellers out there selling, buy two, get one free plants. So you can easily stock up on your plants for not that much money. But on the other hand, the amount of work you might have to do to start getting rid of those snails, in a lot of cases, you get rid of a lot of the snails, you happen to have one egg hiding there, suddenly you're back to square one with a lot of snails in there. So with this over here, you're pretty much guaranteed no snails, no diseases, whatnot. You just open it up, put it in your tank according to the best methods for the particular plant, and then go from there. So here's an example of a snail that I actually want in my tank. This is a neorite snail. As I mentioned before, they don't reproduce in these freshwater tanks. Although they do lay eggs, those eggs don't hatch. So that might be one thing. You might be a little annoyed at the fact that you've got these eggs on your glass walls or eggs on your decorations. In terms of having eggs on the glass, I usually just get one of those scraping razors and just scrape them off. I usually do that here and there anyways to clean off algae in the tanks. So as you can see here, I've got a couple of ramshorn snails that had basically hitched a ride along some plants, one of these plants probably in here, and then they've kind of just blown up out of control. So this tank right now, it's a quarantine tank. These plants I haven't really switched out. I just keep these plants in this tank. Don't plan on cutting any pieces, taking them out, putting them in other tanks because of the ramshorn snails. They're kind of limited right now because this is a quarantine tank. It doesn't get fed that often. Right now there's no fish in here. I did have a pleco in here earlier. I was feeding it, and then as a result then the ramshorns do get some extra food. But for the most part, this tank is just up and running because anytime I need to quarantine a sick or injured fish, I could do it in here, or if I'm getting new fish, I can put them in here. I do have some neorite snails in here that I got purchasing via eBay, and they're just kind of hanging out here until I'm ready to move them to other tanks. But as you can see, outside of there's some sand left over on the bottom of the tank. this tank is very clean in terms of algae. You don't see much algae on the plants. You don't see much algae on the glass, and that's because these snails are very efficient in cleaning it up. Here's an example of another tank, kind of a messy tank, so ignore the kind of rough looking aspect of it. I was trying to do a soil substrate there in order to grow out some plants. Obviously it kind of went out of control, but I did get some pest snails in there, and if you can see these bubbles, little bubbles over here, that's snail eggs. I can see a couple small snails right there, and so they kind of went out of control in this tank as well. So same type of thing too. I just need to break this tank down, wash it out, reset it, and then hopefully that takes care of the snails. There are other ways to take care of snails that I might cover in a later video. So when it comes to prepping these plants, it's just a matter of taking it out of the bag and then washing this agar off of it. You can see it's kind of got this jelly-like stuff on the bottom there. That's what they call the agar, and that's the growing medium that it grows in there. So you need to wash that all off. It's not going to harm your tank if it gets in the tank, but it's always good just to remove it. So it looks like I've got a bunch of plants in here. I mean, these are just small pieces. I'm going to glue them all to like two different rocks and just put it in my shrimp tank over there to start growing. And then later on, if I want to harvest the more off of it, I'll do that. You can plant these under your substrate, like your soil or your sand, but you don't want the rhizome to be underneath because then they'll rot. So this is pretty small too. It's kind of hard to see the rhizome, so I'm just going to glue these onto the surface of the rock using super glue. And then from there, once they grow out a little more, then I'll be able to pluck them off and kind of clip some pieces for other tanks. So that's one of the things I do with all my plants, whether I'm buying online via eBay or like I bought this locally. I'll start growing them, as you saw in that other quarantine tank over there. And then I can, well, in that quarantine tank, I'm not necessarily going to take them off just yet because there's always the possibility of those pest snails coming in. In my other tanks that don't have any pest snails in there, I can clip off parts of the plants and use them for my other tanks. That's a big money savings there. Now that those are rinsed off, I got a couple of rocks over here. I'm going to glue these onto them. And I just use super glue for gluing them on. Works great. Super glue's kind of been used up, so I'm just kind of scraping out whatever's left in there with a toothpick and applying it to the rock here. Grab some plants here. I usually just hold it on for 10-15 seconds just to make sure it adheres. That rock is done. Got another rock here for some more plants. I'm gonna let these set for about 20-30 seconds, then I'll go put them in the tank. So these are going into the shrimp tank. Got a bunch of shrimplets in there, trying not to mush any of them when I'm putting the rocks in. Got a little bit of agar in here, so you can see floating around. Not that agar is going to really cause any harm into the tank, but rather just get it out. Here's the next day. These plants are settling in fine. Might see a little bit of glossiness from the super glue. Once the algae starts growing over that, you won't notice that anymore in the rocks. But no snails as a result of these plants here, so I don't have to worry about that. So one of the other benefits of these tissue culture plants is that they won't come with any algae on them. Since they're grown in a lab, They're grown in a controlled environment. No snails, no disease, no algae. So whether that's a huge benefit or not, I don't know. Algae is pretty much everywhere, just like with mold. Algae you're going to find pretty much everywhere. And as soon as you add some water and let things gather up, the chances of avoiding algae are very slim. So when you're bringing in fish from other tanks, you're buying fish, you're bringing those in, there's always going to be a little bit of water on that fish when you swap them over into the new tank from wherever you brought them from. There's probably going to be a very tiny amount of algae on the water that's covering the fish, and then as soon as they're introduced in the tank, you're introducing algae. So totally avoiding algae with this, yeah, it'll definitely help keep some of the bad algae, but eventually over time your tank is going to get algae regardless. Another thing with these tissue culture plants is you're a little more limited in what plants you can get. Some of the more larger plants, the larger Anubias, I haven't seen in tissue cultures. I've seen some of the smaller Anubias plants that you can get in a tissue culture. But when it comes to the large Anubias and some of the other large plants like Amazon swords, I haven't been able to find them in a tissue culture format. Basically, you're just buying them tank grown, and depending on where the tank was, you run the risk of having snails come in with those plants as well too. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What are your thoughts on snails? Do you love the snails? Do you tolerate the snails? Do you not want snails at all? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.